A not-so-small-time town growing up in Plainfield, New Hampshire. On a beautiful spring morning in 1955, my life began, and so did the onset of my growing up years in Plainfield, New Hampshire, a not-so-small-time town. To some, Plainfield, a small town whose residents live a rural country lifestyle, may seem like a setting with little to offer. However, to me, the town offered countless experiences that created the basis of who I would become and the experiences that have served me well throughout my life. For years, I have jotted down notes about this charming town in that formative period of time in my life. I soon began to realize as I progressed with the writing process, using the old-fashioned method of putting pencil to paper, just how many thoughts and memories occupied my mind. Plainfield, New Hampshire has been a very special place since the time that it began. It is a beautiful town, occupying nearly 53 square miles of land and water. Its western edge lies along the banks of the Connecticut River. There are fertile fields lying among the rolling hills and the stately mountains, which all add their picturesque qualities to the scene. Mount Ascutney rises majestically from the land in the neighboring state of Vermont and watches dutifully over the river valley. This mountain, called a monadnock, reaches over 3,000 feet, featuring forms created during the last glacial period. Huge sections of its mighty granite outcrops can be seen, especially near the top. Many photographers and artists have captured the mountain's beauty in their works, including Plainfield artist Maxfield Parrish. The deep and rich blue-green colors painting its slopes change with the variations of light that shine down on it, while the clouds that hover above offer their shadows to the peaks and valleys, adding to the picture before you. In autumn, Mount Ascutney's sides light up like a fire with glorious shades of red, orange, and yellow. The exploding colors create an alluring New England sight that brings many from afar to see. The winter snow will soon begin to cover the peaks and signal the approach of the next season. Each direction traveled gives the viewer a different perspective of the mountain's elusive apex. On approach from roads in both New Hampshire and its neighbor Vermont, one's eyes see what appears to be the tallest peak, only to soon discover another reaching higher and claiming its place as the summit. I still search eagerly for which peak of this grand landmark is the highest, even though I already know the answer. The charm of this serene river valley life offers nature's very best and has beckoned many dating back to the time of King George. In 1761, King George issued a land grant to settlers living in the town of Plainfield, Connecticut, to begin a new life on the untouched, fertile grounds of this region, where the Connecticut River flows through the valley. The Connecticut is the longest river in New England. It runs 407 miles from its origin in the Connecticut Lakes in northern New Hampshire, where it borders Canada, and eventually sheds its clean waters into the Atlantic Ocean at Long Island Sound in the state of Connecticut. The Connecticut River, as well as the brooks and streams feeding it, created a generous water supply for the settlers and their animals. They had found a perfect place to settle next to a vital waterway, which was bordered by land containing rich soils needed for farming and raising sheep. This land also provided a bountiful supply of especially fine white pines that could be used to build ship masts for the king's English fleets. Where did all of this natural beauty and rich fertile land come from? It is best described as a geological paradise created when the last glacial period occurred during the Lake Wisconsin glaciation, dating back nearly 20,000 years. After reaching its final extent, the Laurentide ice sheet started to recede northward, and the Great Lake Hitchcock began forming near Middleton, Connecticut. This was due to the damming up of the abutting ice margin near Rocky Hill, Connecticut. The glacial lake grew as the ice slowly melted and retreated up the Connecticut River Valley, carving the land and leaving in its path a magnificent landscape. As the water leveled, it deposited its fine silt and wondrous clay along the way. These valuable deposits continue to provide richness to the valley today. All of this splendid geological history created unique and prosperous lands for its future inhabitants and the setting for my story.
Let's discuss Mount Ascutney a little bit.
Okay.
As I understand it, Mount Ascutney is the highest single peak in New England. That means it's not part of any mountain range. It's not part of the Green Mountains, for example. It just is Mount Monadnock is not part of the White Mountains in Keene.
Correct.
And not only that, but it has a long history, and I believe, and I don't know if you mentioned it in your book, but in other readings that I've had, the artists who gathered at the colony, which we will discuss, compared it to Mount Fujiyama.
Oh, really?
And
yeah.
Of course, Mount Fujiyama has been in thousands of photographs, but also in woodcut illustrations by the Japanese artists in various times. So in describing the Connecticut River Valley, you're also bringing a focus to the Twin State Valley, which consists of New Hampshire and Vermont.
That's correct.
And you have had connections in both New Hampshire and Vermont.
I have.
Where were you born, actually? Were you born in Plainfield?
No, I was actually born in Hanover.
In Hanover?
Yeah, at the old Mary Hitchcock Hospital. Oh. Yes, but I lived in Plainfield, yes.
Well, I had my tonsils out and adenoids in the old hospital.
As
there.
Well did I.
So, yes, and I can relate very well to your book here about Plainfield and Cornish. What are some of the other areas in the Twin State Valley with which you have connections, especially through your family and your heritage?
Woodstock and Bridgewater, Vermont were homes to members of both my mother's and my father's family. And I spent a lot of time in that area when I was growing up, as well as right here in the White River Junction, Hartford area. I went to high school in Lebanon, so I spent a lot of time in the Lebanon area. And
Did you graduate from Lebanon?
I did, yes, in 1972. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yep.
So now they can count you as one of the alumnus who has written a book.
That's correct, yes.
I don't know if any others from Lebanon High School have, but they may be.
I'm sure there must be a few authors out there, yes. Yes, and then I also spent a lot of time, of course, in Windsor, Vermont, which was right across the river from Plainfield and Cornish.
And I can relate to that because I was born in Windsor in the old hospital on Main Street.
Yes, as a young child, I suffered a lot from pneumonia, and I spent a lot of time in the old Windsor Hospital.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, so you know right where it is.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
And the building is still there.
It is.
It's now been converted, I believe, to a senior home or facility. Mm-hmm. And where else did you visit?
In later years, my maternal grandparents moved to Westminster, Vermont, so I spent a lot of time there, as well as my other relatives down to Springfield, Mass. I used to spend a lot of time in Springfield, Mass, and Keene, New Hampshire. I had relatives, so although Plainfield is the focus of my story, I have weaved into various parts of my book experiences that I had in all of these places as well.
Well, let me ask you this question, which is sort of different. When you were growing up as a child in Plainfield and around this area, did you ever hear the term flatlander being used?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes.
Because I never did until later years when more people coming from, let's say, Connecticut or Massachusetts were moving in.
Right.
Well, when I grew up it was more common for us to go down to Massachusetts
Right.
and visit relatives and people
Yeah.
there, and maybe in Connecticut or over in Vermont, and occasionally if you had them
Right.
in Maine.
Yeah.
So anyway, what else did you do in growing up on the farms? Did you get a good glimpse? Did you take part in the farm chores? What
Yes.
did you do?
My maternal grandparents owned a farm. In fact, my family's home was part of that farm originally, and it was given to my parents as a wedding gift, that about a little over an acre. And so I spent a lot of time at the farm when my grandparents lived there, which was a little less than a mile from where I was actually living. And on Dodge, I lived on Westgate Road in Plainfield, and they lived on Dodge Road. And then when my grandparents moved to Westminster, another family, of course, bought the farm and took it over, and they had children my age, so I continued to spend a lot of time on their farm. As well as there's another family called the Jordans from Plainfield, New Hampshire, that lived at the very top of Westgate Road, and I spent countless hours in their homes and their barns and stuff. So
You do a lot of jumping in the hay in those barns?
yes, we did. A lot of jumping in the hay, yes. Yes. And my family had, we didn't have what you would call a farm. It was probably a mini farm, but we had horses and a few other farm animals from time to time as well.
Did you raise chickens and pigs? And,
Yes, my family raised chickens, yes. I'm not too fond of chickens, but yes.
well, maybe the old rooster chased you.
Yeah, the old rooster definitely chased
It
me.
did me, too.
Yes.
And he ended up in the stew on a Sunday.
Yeah, and I also write about we used to, kill the chickens and take their heads off and strip the feathers down back of the house. So that's not a pleasant memory that I have. But I guess it was part of growing up on a farm and in the country.
In reading your book, I understand that your mother worked in the Cornish Art Colony. Is that true? Or what did she do?
It is true, yes. As part of, when I write about the Cornish colony, of course, it started long before I was born, but it has an important history for the Plainfield and Cornish areas.
Well, it does for the state of New Hampshire, for example, and also for Vermont,
Right.
because it's close by, and there's a connection between Windsor and St. Gaudens. Is
Yes.
there not? I think you discussed that in your
Yes.
book as well.
And so when the famous people, the artists and the architects and the intellects came from the big cities to spend their time in this beautiful area, they, of course, had large houses that they wanted to have people work in, and as well as some of them that only came up for a few weeks, rented homes. They lived with people in the local area. They bought a lot of the products that the people grew from this area. And my mother used to clean for a lot of these places, so she would go in and do housekeeping for them. And of course, I was quite young, so I got to jump on board with her and go and visit these beautiful houses and follow along with her.
So who were some of the people that she assisted or worked for there that you can recall?
Sure. Well, she cleaned for the Platts and the Littells. She also cleaned for the Salinger family. Now, they didn't live in a large home, but Peggy Salinger, Margaret
became
Salinger.
her
Yeah, she and
close
I
friend. You
are
became good friends.
lifelong friends, yes. And so, and she cleaned at St. Gaudens. So I spent a lot of time in a lot of those Cornish colony
Now,
homes.
she cleaned before it became a federal
Yes,
national park area.
yes, she did. Yeah.
And I visited there when there was just a housekeeper and another fellow there. There may have been other people.
Yeah.
And I remember my grandfather taking me there, and they had these arbors, and there were grapes, and I
Yeah.
was started to reach up for them. My grandmother said, "Don't you touch those."
Yes.
And the lady said, "No, go right ahead because nobody's picking them, eating them." So that's what I did, and they were delicious. They were, I believe, Concord grapes.
Yeah.
They're trying to revive the grape culture there now at St. Gaudens.
Yeah.
But one question that intrigued me, or that I have about the place, when I was there, we went inside, of course, and the lady took us through, and the husband
Yeah.
and everything, and my grandfather had been there before, but anyway, they mentioned witches' doors, and they had these doors in one section, and you pull them and close them together. And they told me it was the reason they shut them was to keep witches out.
Oh, really?
And then I heard, I asked a lot of people that in
Yeah.
the park service and everything, if they'd ever heard about it, and other people in Cornish, and I got another answer, which I won't exactly discuss fully, but apparently, according to some, the men wanted to be alone, so they would send the ladies into that section while they were smoking or doing some other things
really?
in there, and that's why they gave it that name. But I don't know. These tales are.
Yeah,
are
I've not
something
ever
else.
heard that tale. I tell you, a person maybe you could speak to about that is Dr. Palmer in Windsor.
Oh, really?
His mother was the curator of the St. Gaudens Memorial when I, was young, and they actually lived in the house. So
Yeah. Well, I believe
maybe
they might have been the couple that was there.
yeah.
For all I know.
So maybe his mom has shared stories with him
This
from
had
those
to have
days.
been in the 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Well, this
early
was
50s
probably in
somewhere.
the
Yeah.
more in the 50s.
I see.
Yeah, but
Yeah, because I think they were calling it the memorial at the
Yes,
time. There.
right.
Now, Windsor, Vermont has a connection there with the Everett's family, I believe, with the St. Gaudens, and of course, the Juniper Hill Inn that was over
Right.
there in Windsor, and that was part of the family, their estate, I believe. And then the Beamans had a connection with them because I
Yeah.
think they were related, these two families.
yeah. Well, actually, the Beamans, the Beaman name is kind of like considered the beginning of the Cornish colony
see.
because they owned the Beaman farm right there by the beaver pond, and
I'm glad
they
you
were
mentioned that because that's what I knew it as Beaman's Pond, not
Yes.
as Blow-Me-Down Pond.
right.
And the mill that was there, of course, the road has changed. When I
Yes.
came back after many years being away and I went over that road, I said, "What happened here? Where's the bridge?" Because
Yeah.
I remember the winding road and everything, and then they had,
Right.
just stripped
Yeah.
that down, and then the road was above the mill
Yeah.
where it used to be down, and you would walk from the road right directly to the mill.
Right.
So
Well,
you
so
were-
yeah. The Beamans were friends with Augustus St. Gaudens. They invited him to come and visit with them. He too fell in love with this beautiful area, and eventually he bought the St. Gaudens property where Aspet sits from the Beamans. As you know, the St. Gaudens property and the Beaman farm were all one piece of property, and they are again today. Soon, other artists began to follow to be near Augustus St. Gaudens. One of those artists was Maxfield Parrish. His father, Stephen Parrish, who was an etcher, and Maxfield Parrish, who was an illustrator and a painter, came to the area, and they purchased the property that is now known as the Oaks.
And he's very popular. And I remember when I was going to elementary school in Cornish in the 3rd grade, the teacher telling me that about Parrish Blue, that he
Right.
had developed that, and I always remembered that. And of course, when I saw pictures or reproductions of his work in magazines and
Right.
everything, I was aware of that. Now, did you actually meet him, or did you meet his son, or?
I can't remember what year he died. So when I was quite young, yes, I believe probably I did. But I don't really have any real strong recollection of
I
any of
see.
that. Yeah.
But did you go to their place?
Oh
and
yes,
visit?
absolutely. Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, didn't they have a fire or an accident there or
Yeah,
something?
there was a fire there in later years. At one point it was turned into a restaurant, and so
Really?
yes, and so I used to go there to eat on occasion. And then there was a fire, and I really can't remember when, but I want to say somewhere in the 1970s,
That seems to be
70s
a
perhaps.
common tragedy in the area somewhat. I mean, Winston Churchill, the novelist,
Yeah.
place burned to the
Yeah.
ground. And I think there have been some other fires around
Yeah.
that, St. Gaudens had, I think, 2 or 3 fires
Yes, yeah,
there. I think when I was going to school, there was a fire because one of my classmates, his father was on the Cornish Fire Department, and he had gone to that fire
Right.
and everything. And they did rescue some of the things.
Oh, yes,
but,
yeah.
Of course. Now, speaking about the Salingers, are you still friends with the daughter? You say you're lifelong
Yes,
friends.
yeah, absolutely.
Did you meet her father at all?
Oh yes, yeah,
I see.
yeah.
And what was your impression? I mean, as a child.
Sure. Well, as a child, he was just Peggy's dad, he used to drive us to school on occasion, and, I spent a lot of time in their home. And so I did know there was something special about him, obviously, because
Right.
he was famous, but you didn't really, back then, we didn't think about him as being famous. The most unique thing about him back then was that he spent a lot of time down in the woods in his cabin writing, and so Peggy and I would sneak down and, peek in on him, and he was always friendly to us. He might give us oh, come on,
Really?
girls,
Yeah.
you get out of here, or once in a while he might invite us to have one of those cold Coca-Colas we used to have in the little
Oh, yeah.
spring that ran by, but the little stream. But yeah, I have fond memories of those years.
That's
Yeah.
good. She's written a book, of course, Dreamcatcher. And,
Yes, she has.
And you've read that, I presume.
have.
And I think that is a wonderful book because it dispels a lot of notions people have about him. And of course, people said that he wasn't ever going to write again, but I guess that notion has been dispelled
Yeah.
as well.
I hope that we will see his writings. I don't know, any more than anyone else does, unless they're, have seen the work, whether or not he did. But I can only guess that a man of that talent probably did continue to write in later years, and I hope that it will get shared with the world.
Well, I think as a writer, he was writing regardless, and
Yeah.
that was it. And I would be surprised if he had ever stopped, really.
Right.
You met her through your mother working there, or did you meet her in the kindergarten? Would you?
No, actually, we met through my mother working for them.
I see.
And then she and I attended the Tiny Tot Nursery School, run by Clara Perry, who is still alive today and doing well.
You
And
said she's 100?
yes, she's 100 years old, yes. And anyway, she had a farm just down the road from where the Salinger home was, and just up the road, if you will, from where my grandparents' farm was. And so we went there. It was a 2-year program. You were in nursery school 1 year and then kindergarten the second year.
So it was a
And-
combination of schools.
Yes, and we held our graduation at the Plainfield Grange Hall on the stage upstairs. And so we became fast friends in those years. And then Peggy went to the Plainfield Elementary School, even though she lived in Cornish. She went to Plainfield Elementary School 1st through 5th grade with me. And those were great years. I write a lot in my book about some of our shenanigans in those early years of school.
Now, did she teach? Was she the only teacher in that school? Nobody else taught?
Right. Mrs. Perry was it was her program. She was the teacher.
So she managed both the nursery aspect and the kindergarten aspect?
Yes,
or
right.
were they they were different, they were differentiated, were they? By
Yeah,
age?
they were two different, by age. Yeah, I think we kind of all were together, if memory serves me correctly, but it was a kind of like a step-up program, with 2 years. And it depended upon your age level and when you were ready to go on to first grade.
And then you continued on beyond that school, of course, you and Peggy.
Yes, we went to the Plainfield Elementary School, first through fifth grade there.
I see.
And then in sixth grade, the Plainfield students went to the Meriden White School for 6th, 7th, and 8th. And at that point, Peggy transferred to a different school.
I see. So you were not in that school together?
We were not, no.
I see. But you remained friends all these years?
Yes, absolutely,
and,
yes.
You met frequently or
Yes.
infrequently?
Yeah, we managed to get together at least once a
That's
year,
good.
always for the Cornish Fair.
I was at the very first Cornish Fair they held in Cornish. My grandmother was involved in that. And a bunch of us boys dressed up as clowns because my grandmother had bought somewhere a trunk full of clown costumes. So we acted as clowns at that time. And there was, I remember one of the Cornish residents playing a fortune teller. And we had dart games, and it was just inside the town hall. And I think we might have been there the second year. But after that, I never went to the fair again until a few years back, and I was surprised at how it had expanded and developed and everything. And I believe there's a picture in your book showing you on a Ferris wheel there.
Yes.
And of course, when I was around there was nothing like that at all. And they didn't even have, at that time in the first one, any real farm exhibits or anything. They just had minor things going on there. But that expanded and really grew.
It has, yes.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you, you were mentioning the town hall and I believe the Grange Hall in Plainfield. Now, there's some artwork, at least in the Grange Hall. I don't know about the town hall. I think the artwork I'm thinking about in the Grange Hall is on the second floor.
It is,
And
yes.
I can't remember who the artist.
Well,
It wasn't Maxfield Parrish.
it was not, although I will talk about Maxfield Parrish in a minute, but I want to make sure I get the artist's name right for the Grange Hall. On the second floor, there's a small stage, and the artist that did the mural there is called Lucia Fairchild Fuller, and the name of that mural is called The Puritan Settlers.
Puritan Settlers.
Right.
Now, Fuller, was she related to any Fullers that were artists? Or
Well, she was an artist,
Yeah,
and
she was an
and she was part of the Cornish colony.
That's why I saw the name in the list of that. Yes.
Now, in the town hall, we have the Maxfield Parrish stage set, which is beautiful.
I don't recall seeing that. I think they usually had that when I was in there. I think I was only in there once for some book sales or something, and they might have had that.
It's a beautiful stage set, and they're going to be celebrating its 100th year anniversary in 2016. The Plainfield Historical Society is working on some events around that, so it's nearly 100 years old.
Is the Plainfield Historical, are you a member of that?
I am.
Are they very active?
They are, yes.
And do they have a building where they...
Yeah, the Mothers and Daughters Clubhouse in Plainfield is where they store their artifacts and where they have their meetings, and they have speakers there just about every month, some kind of an event. They're quite active in the area.
So you could speak at various historical societies.
absolutely.
or,
Yes, I'd love
talk
to do
about
that.
your book, or not, or about history in general, your
Right.
experiences there, and so forth.
Yes,
Well, maybe you have a career there, going
perhaps.
for that and everything. Well, I want to thank you again.
Well,
and
thank
I
you, Hal.
certainly appreciate it. And,
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.